All right, guys, moving on to lesson 3. So today we're talking about standard deviation and variance. And today we're going to use that same graphing calculator, but yesterday we were using it out of convenience. Today we're using it more out of necessity. So standard deviation and variance are a lot more time consuming to calculate, especially when you have a super large data set. So most people will just use a graphing calculator to do it for them because it's not worth the time and trouble to do it by hand. So yesterday we were using it, but those are still pretty easy to do by hand, standard deviation and variance. You will more likely than not see everyone use a graphing calculator for. So first, let's talk about what standard deviation and variance are. So variation is really a tool to help us find out what the standard deviation is. So when we are looking at a data set, we're going to find the mean, and then variance is measuring how far each one of those points is from the mean, like how far spread out they are. But because some of those distances are positive and some are negative, they're going to square them so that it's a more equal playing field. Distance we like to measure in positives, and then it's going to average those squares. Now, because we squared them when we were calculating our variance, we're going to take the square root to find the standard deviation. And standard deviation is really what I think tells us more about a data set. It measures how spread out our data set is. And standard deviation, a lot of times they'll use a lowercase sigma. Variance is that standard deviation squared. Or if you want to do it the other way, your calculator really is finding the variance and then taking the square root of that variance to get the standard deviation. Okay, so I'm going to start by typing in my first data set here. And remember, when you first open this, it's going to be set to sample. So I had already loaded this up, but when you first load it, it's going to be set to sample, and we want it to be on population because this is our entire data set, not just a portion of a data set. So I went ahead and typed in those 5 numbers and clicked calculate. And it has all the same stuff from yesterday because it's the same site. But we're focusing on standard deviation, and you can see it has this lowercase sigma and the variance. So let's go ahead. It says mean was 10, median was 10. Let's run to the nearest 10th. So standard deviation is 14.1, which means our data is spread out roughly as a group 14.1 from the mean of 10. Obviously, some are more spread out than others, where 30 is 20 away, negative 10 is also 20 away, but not all of them are that far away. And then our variance was 200. Okay, and then I'm going to repeat that with data set B. And we want population, make sure it's always on population. And this time I have 1, 3, 12, 15, and 19. All right, so I have a mean of 10 and a median of 12. My standard deviation is 6.9. My variance is 48. So again, to find this variance, what your calculator is doing is figuring out how far each point is from 10, squaring that, averaging that, and that's where our 48 comes from. And then standard deviation is the square root of that. And standard deviation, again, in my mind, tells us more about our data set. So roughly each point, if we average them together, is about 6.9 from our mean. All right, and data set C. So mine's still on population. That's what we want for all of our problem types. We have 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And also something I want to point out to you is this one is more spread out than our second set. If we look at our third data set, these are all 1 apart, so I expect my standard deviation to be pretty small. The larger your standard deviation, the more widespread your data set is. So here I'm going to click calculate. So this time I got a mean and a median of 10. I have a standard deviation of 1.4, which should make sense because they're all like 1 point away from each other, but like 10 and 12 are 2 away, 8 and 10 are 2 away, so 1.4 is our average distance, and then our variance was 2. All right, so those are the 3 I'm doing with you today. You have these 5 to work through, and you can check your answers on a Google form. And then the next page is also part of lesson 3. So these 5 are also part of lesson 3, and they have a separate Google form for you to check those 5 as well. All right.